Today on the Adapted Lens podcast, we welcome acclaimed wildlife photographer and Nikon Ambassador, Moose Peterson. So for those of you who don't know, Moose, tell me a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself? I'm a simple photographer who has spent some time and been very fortunate to be in front of some very cool things and more fortunate to bring those stories back to people.
So as you may or may not know, this podcast is actually all about learning to adapt to changing circumstances. You had a pretty big adaptation early in your career. You changed from film to digital. Tell me a little bit about that transition, why you did it, and what inspired you to be one of the first.
Well, first, you said early in my career, and it was about 20 years into it. So, yeah, early is probably a good description because I was probably just starting to catch my breath at 20 years. Why did I go into it? Well, for those people who had no reference to film photography, and especially the business side, because the business side, you know, Sharon and I were just joking about the other day, Sharon being not just my wife, but my partner and my buddy. Back when we used to make submissions to clients, it was a heck of a process of pulling the slides out of the filing cabinet and then organizing them. And you realize that with slides, it's a one-shot deal, right? You only had that one slide of that photograph. There wasn't numerous copies all over the place. You had that one. So it was very valuable. And you had to sit there and go to the post office and get a prepaid mailer and then mail it off and then hope it'd get there. And then you got FedEx came up into the world, so then you had a little more security of sending things back and forth. Today, it's click, and you're done. It's a copy. It's never the quote-unquote original. So the business side, you know, there was this clause. We used to have a thing called a delivery memo that you'd hope the client would sign. And one of the clauses was if there's any damages to that photograph, it'd be $1,500, which was way more than you would ever get paid basically for the photograph unless it was a cover. Well, with digital, that all went away. There's no more delivery memos. There's no worry about damages. The response is much faster, quicker, cleaner. And the actual final printing is a better job than it used to be. So there wasn't anything but pros when it comes to switching to digital.
It's funny you mentioned the clause and all that. I was actually starting out all this. I'm starting to look at maybe shooting for some commercial work, and I was reading the submission guidelines on one of the magazines that I read, and it talks about, you know, self-addressed stamped envelope, and you know we don't guarantee that we'll send back your submission file and all that stuff. So it's pretty interesting how much some of that carries forward.
Well, since you brought that up, you have to realize that all that you have on websites about submissions, it's just to scare you off and to weed out the people who have no clue what they're doing. For example, there's the we don't accept unsolicited submissions. That's all I've done for 40 years is unsolicited submissions. So, you know, that one clause scares a lot of people off. The next thing is, you'll see that clause that says send a query letter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? And you're sending a letter of words to people who are going to buy visuals to describe your visuals. So if we run that through our old brain pan, you realize that, guess what? It's really just to filter out those who have either no clue about the business or don't have images, because everybody's time is precious, especially that of the photo buyer. So it's an amusing world.
So that's a really good segue. Talk to me a little bit about the changing role photography has played editorially in your career. What do photo buyers look for today that they may not have looked for 20 or 30 or even 40 years ago?
Well, to be honest, I'm really thankful that the editorial world really has not changed that much when it comes to the photograph. What is inside those boundaries? If anything, the craftsmanship that they're looking for the pendulum has swung back again. Enough of manipulated images have gone through and have fallen apart in the press that they you can do a lot with Photoshop, but some of it just doesn't cut the final muster when you go through the process. But editorial is where I still live. I'm on this bent lately to get more covers. I've had 2 covers so far this year, which is, to be honest with you, 2 more than I had last year. So that's just because it just pushes my photography forward by working with the parameters which I have to deal with as a photographer. But, a couple of my own podcasts lately, I've talked about how, the true measure of photograph is not what we see on the web with 256 colors and lots of likes. It's actually when it goes to, for lack of better terms, the professionals, the ones not only is their livelihood on the line, but so is their publications on the line, putting out images the best they can find that tells a story that makes the publisher, the boss, happy, and of course the bean counters excited. And those folks, those photo editors that kind of make me look really mellow and quiet. I still some of my tongue lashings, while they hurt originally, I still carry them with me, and they're with me as I take pictures to this day.
Well, it helps you get better, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose, of them lashing you, is maybe not to necessarily just belittle you, but hopefully the next time you send something in, you get what they're looking for.
Well, there's some of the belittlings in there. There's no doubt to that. That's human nature. But no, the photo editors I've been so blessed to work with, if they did not see potential, especially back in the day, and if they didn't see that I was worth their time, you just would get the rejection notice. The fact that they would take time and it's not like they say, if you go buy this body, this lens, if you use this technique, or, it's not like that kind of suggestion to improve your photography. Some of the belittling comments are like that, but the actual comments are much more subtle. A lot of things that I say that people attribute to me come from many of the conversations I have. One of them, on this topic is lots of little subtleties add up to big drama, where there is no one big drama at one click. You have to add up a bunch of little things. And that statement of mine comes from all the little things that editors have shared with me and encouraged me to explore, that brings that all to life.
So you teach as well as obviously still being heavily involved in editorial work, and you're an author, and you're a blogger, and you're a podcaster. How do you balance it all along with family and knuckleheads like me who invite you to be a guest on their podcast? How in the world do you make it all fit into Moose's day?
Well, there's lots of things that go on. First of all, I have the support of my family. I have since the beginning. And, Sharon's over there at her desk smiling at me right now and telling me to sit up straight and not slur my words. And, so I get all the support I need from them. And so that's why they're always been number one. As far as balancing the rest, as my sons Brett and Jake say, I cheat. I use technology to make things, basically in the digital darkroom, I'm always looking for speed, flexibility, and quality. And so I've found those things that make that work. When it comes to things to write on the blog or to talk about on the podcast, that's because I'm out shooting all the time. And I don't know what it started, but for the last 18 months, almost 2 years, I've been driven to see a lot of things that when I first started out in my career and the biologist told me I should go see, but I simply didn't have the time or the money, I've gone out to see. So I'm on this schedule where I'm literally gone for a week, and then I come home for 3 to 5 days, maybe 7 days, and I'm gone for a week. At this time, I'm home for 4 days. And just because I'm totally insane, I'm busy packing the house because we're moving, and I had nothing else to do with my spare time. But I work hard so I can play hard, and it's just the way I was raised and the way I just keep on moving that ball forward.
You know, it's amazing. You say when you're out shooting all the time, you say you come up with these ideas and things to write about or talk about. It's so true. Until I started doing this, quote unquote, full time, it was a struggle to come up with concepts. It just comes to you now. Is that something you've experienced, where you're out there and click, 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 and something comes to you, and quick you're writing it down for a podcast or for a blog post?
Well, I was my whole career is nothing but stories of how lucky I've been. When I'd only been at it for 9 years, and Popular Photography magazine picked me up as their nature editor. And I was incredibly fortunate to have an amazing boss, Pete, who was been around for a long time, a really great guy, and was really willing to share what he learned. And one of the things he taught me right off the bat was to write from my files. And what that means is that the stories I want to share, the techniques that I want to get across, have to come from my own photography that I've already done. Not that I imagine or envision, but what I want to, what I've already accomplished and how I accomplished that. So that has been in my head forever. So I'm out shooting, and at this point, a lot of things that I do are so second nature that if somebody doesn't say, hey, why are you doing that? And I have to stop and think, well, why in the heck am I doing this? Oh, yeah, I'm doing this because. And that's when I go, there's something there that I might want to share. And that's the two-edged sword of going out shooting with people all the time, is the fact that they jog my memory, which is, like anybody getting older, things get filed in drawers that I don't remember. So that opens that drawer, brings out that thought, and gives me something to write about.
I certainly enjoy your blog posts and podcasts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So one of the first things that drew me to your photography was your work with the San Joaquin kit fox. That was years ago. The passion that you had for that species going back year after year, it was just so inspiring for me. Tell me a bit about your work with wildlife and how that's changed in the last 40 years, and how the changes of wildlife because of habitat loss and climate change have impacted your work.
Well, I guess you want to put a real downer on this podcast with that question.
Make it all bright and happy. I know it's a tough one. Well,
the kit fox I haven't worked with for a few years, and that's a big hole. After so many decades. So the work that Sharon and I did in California, 80s and 90s and beginning of 2000, was because so much of our habitat for these critters was vanishing. And now that habitat that we work so hard to preserve is changing just from temperatures. So a lot of the critters we talk about, sadly, a lot of the image requests that go out of this office is for places that are gone and critters that aren't being seen. So for Sharon and I, our focus has changed a lot into not so much saying, here it is, you need to save it, because that message after 20 years wasn't being heard and wasn't being acted on, to just basically creating the current memories of what we see and trying to share that wonders. It's, the life gets real busy, and the very small few that are very involved in our environment, it's like preaching to the choir, and it doesn't really move that ball forward. It just, gets everybody charged up, but it's on a very small scale.
Sure.
So, right now, and like I've seen many times in my career, wildlife photography goes up and down. And right now it's very much on an upward swing again. People are very much into working with critters, photographing them. And that's great. My biggest concern is that, one, I see way too often photographers loving a scene or critters to death to the detriment of the critters. Because, in the old days, hate to keep saying the old days, because, pretty soon my walker is going to be pulled up next to my desk. And, but in editorial world, you used to have to caption your photographs, whether they were a captive or not a captive. In other words, it used to be a thing where people go to wild animal parks and they'd have wildlife models who would do performances and stuff, and they'd photograph it. And while there's nothing wrong with that, is the fact that other photographers see that and think they can go out in the wild and just photograph a wolverine going through a meadow. So that now has been, I don't want to say replaced, but it's being pushed out with what people can do with Photoshop.
Right.
And one of the things with Photoshop, and again, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you were to take the photograph of this incredible bald eagle and then take this landscape shot and then you sit there and you put it all together, 4 or 5 images, well, it's a beautiful image. The question is the reality of it, right? If you want to go out and see that or go out and experience it or photograph it, you can't, because it's not reality. So it's just the nature of the beast. And if I would like the blog post today I put out there, if people would just step back for a second and actually look at the world in which these critters survive in, and work as much to tell something about that world as that, the eyeballs of that critter, we could move that ball forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. I mean, I know that's a lot of what I do with Audubon, taking folks to places maybe they've never been before to appreciate stuff that they've never seen before. And, catching young kids as well. I think, capturing the youth when they are still more impressionable than older folks, to say, hey, this is not going to be here if we don't do something.
Well, I think that's a true sentiment. I spent my first 20 years, Sharon and I, working on one heck of a lot of programs for kids, thinking they would be the ones that would make a difference. Yeah, those kids are now millennials, and we know what's going on there.
Yeah. Yes. Well, not all millennials, since I am one, don't care.
Yes, but that comes back to preaching to the choir.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So not to keep you too much longer, but lastly, if you could give one piece of advice for someone just picking up a camera for the very first time, what would that be?
Shoot every day and stop reading the web.
That's a great piece of advice. I agree 100%.
Just that simple. You're going to... What I have gathered in my short time with the camera is all self-taught. And what I'm sharing is what I've taught out there just doing it. And if a thick-headed guy like me can do it, anybody can do it.
That is just perfect. Thank you so much, Moose, for that word of wisdom. I couldn't agree more. I think, especially since I've started doing this for myself, that shooting every day has made such a difference in my life.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you taking time to rattle my cage and listen to my story. And anybody has questions, of course, I'm here to help answer them any way I can.
Awesome. Thanks again.
All the best.
You too. Did you enjoy this episode of the Adapted Lens podcast? Well, if so, please consider subscribing. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, or consider supporting the Adapted Lens on Patreon. And until next time, thanks for listening.